Hello and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Claudine Wolk. Hey, Claudine, how are you doing?
Hey, Matty. Thanks so much for having me.
I am pleased to have you here. And to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Claudine Wolk is a three-time published author, speaker, columnist, and book marketing expert, and the podcast host of Get Your Book Seen and Sold. And I myself have been a guest on Get Your Book Seen and Sold. We were talking about podcast guesting. I always love talking about podcasting with fellow podcasters. Very meta. And her latest book with co-author Julie Murkette is Get Your Book Seen and Sold. And it is the go-to guide for aspiring authors to dive into publishing and book marketing to successfully sell their books. And so that is what we're going to be talking about today, kind of getting back to fundamentals. And we're going to be talking about message, audience, and hook. And I think that everybody, like I always feel like, oh, sure, yeah, I know what those things are. But I think it's always helpful to give everybody a common context. Claudine, just describe a little bit what you mean, maybe using an example of your own book as message, audience, and hook.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much again for having me.
Sure.
This is my favorite subject, Matty. I get so excited about talking about this because I want to help authors to get their books seen and sold. Why? Because if you write a book, it's so personal and it's so meaningful and you want it passionate. You want to get it out there so badly. And of course you want people to see it and to buy it and to do well with it. You want to do right by your book. And I'd been running into so many authors who, when I was working as a radio host, I would interview authors. And there were so many things about book marketing that they did not understand, or they were just starting to get into after the book was already published. And it would make me so sad. So Julie Murkette and I, my co-author, we got together to write it's this tiny little book. It's like this, it's very thin. And it's basically getting all the information out there to authors, kind of how it works, how book marketing works, and how and what your publishing choices are, so that you're armed with information before your book gets published. But it's okay if you're reading it after your book gets published. It's never too late. That's important. And just to get the scariness out of it and the overwhelmingness of it out of the way. So we start with book marketing fundamentals. Well, the first is audience. Who do you picture as the perfect reader for your book? And a lot of authors don't take the time to do that. They think, oh my gosh, my book is for everyone. Everyone will enjoy it. Okay, and we're going to say, no, 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 no. Specifically, who did you have in mind when you wrote this book? And in Get Your Book Seen and Sold, we have certain questions, prompting exercises that you can go through to try to get to your specific audience. And when we talk about audience and book readers, really what we're talking about is book buyers. Who do you think is going to be the person who's going to pick up this book? And then the other piece of it is, where do those people hang out? Where do they find out about the books that they read? And then finally, where do they buy those books?
I think, especially for many first-time authors, I know this was certainly true for me, that the person I was writing the book for, my ideal audience, was me. And so I think a lot of times getting a book written, which is an enormous effort, takes up
Yep.
all the mental bandwidth that might otherwise be spending some time on marketing. But I also think on that first book, it is just so hard to know. It's so hard to know what reception you even are looking to get and from whom. If people are like, let's say they're in the middle of writing their first book and they understand the concept of understanding audience, but they're really having difficulty thinking beyond this book is for me. Do you have any advice for them about that?
Yes. Try not to be worried about getting so specific that you don't come up with anybody else who might like the book.
Mhm.
Yes, you're writing for yourself, but you are like a lot of other readers. And you're going to be able to make that connection to who else you might think will like your book. But I do think one way to get there is to be willing to have the conversation with someone, be it a friend or be it, a book marketer, but I would say a friend first, to help you come through with who are the folks who might like this book. And it really can be a fiction author or a nonfiction author. who can go through this process. And you had mentioned before about giving examples. So my first book was titled It Gets Easier and Other Lies We Tell New Mothers. It was a nonfiction book, and it was for new moms. But originally, I thought this is going to be the perfect book for pregnant moms, right?
Mhm.
So they'll be armed with great information before they have the baby, and they'll be, you see a theme here with my books. I'm trying to get everybody information before.
Yeah.
But in this case, I chatted it out with a friend of mine who also happened to be really good with marketing. And we started talking about it, and we said, well, wait a minute, do pregnant moms really want to read about being a mom? No. When we talked it through, we realized, no, it's not really for pregnant moms. It's for moms in those first months after they have a baby when they realize that their life is over. No, I mean, when they realize that they are in this new reality where they have to take care of a baby and they actually want the help. So the point is, have a conversation with someone else and talk about who you possibly think, other than yourself, this book might be a good fit for. And someone who else might have a desire for the book. And we talked about maybe coming up with this as you're writing, which I know writers don't like to do because they don't want to think about marketing. Marketing is kind of out there and they want to they want to write. Writers want to write. And I get that. So what I suggest is that you have maybe a little notebook next to you. And as you're writing, you might have a thought, this person might actually love this book, or this is going to be good for this person, or this is going to be good for that person. And just jot it down and then come back to it later.
Yeah, I like that idea I love that conversation you had because I think that in one scenario that, it's going to get easier is a lie. If you're pregnant, sounds alarming, but it's going to get easier as a lie if you're living that is like, oh, what a relief somebody else has had this experience and they're going to have some advice to offer. So I love that idea of how you were able to shift your idea of who the audience was. And I can imagine a similar kind of conversation for a fiction author might be to tell someone the story of your book to the extent you understand it at whatever point you're having that conversation and encourage them to say, oh, that reminds me of such and such. That reminds me of James Patterson, or that reminds me of Margaret Atwood, or that reminds me of whatever. And then either say, yes, yes, that's exactly what I wanted them to say, or say, really? Because I think sometimes, when people say, oh, I can imagine that somebody who would read that story would also read this other author, and it's somebody you never thought of, that's really important information to have. Now, it may change your story or it may change your target audience, but at least you're armed with that information.
Absolutely. And just listening to you talk and bringing up all these different scenarios, it's what an author goes through when they start to think about book marketing, because now this whole other world is opened up to them. Oh my gosh, there are other authors who write the same thing I do, which of course they do, but to the author who's writing, and especially if they're writing for themselves, it's kind of scary to oh my gosh, I'll have competition, but it's important to know. And the key is to use that knowledge, the fact that there are competitive titles out there, to your advantage. That is great information. And it's just the way it's a process. One of the things I like to tell authors is when you start to understand book marketing and how it works, you only have to learn that once. You're going to be doing book marketing the whole time you're an author. You just have to. But understanding how book marketing works only happens once. And once you know how it works and you understand it, you may be coming up with new ideas all the time, but it's going to keep you can rest assured that that knowledge is something that you're not going to have to go through again. And that's comforting.
Yeah, and I think that the nice thing about an author career is that the other people who have something similar to you, you don't have to see them as competition. You can see them as comparables, and that probably no one's going to buy just one book about book marketing and never buy another book. And so all those other books about book marketing that are bringing a slightly different spin to the topic than you are just other books that you can imagine on the shelf of your ideal reader along with yours. Or if you're writing a mystery, people don't buy just one mystery and say, well, I have a nice mystery here. Now I'm not going to buy any more mysteries. No, of course not. Like, it's the shelf of authors that you want to be one of. It's a great way to also think through who your audience is.
Yep. And it's also important to realize that your audience may change, just like mine did. I thought it was pregnant moms, but it ended up being new moms. I also was thinking that it would be good maybe uh, as a gift idea. And then what ended up happening was I couldn't really figure out how to get it there to that point, to the gift idea point. But what ended up happening was that people were writing in the reviews that it was a great gift for baby showers because the gal who was pregnant, even though I said it wasn't for pregnant moms, she would pick up the book and she would show her guests. It gets easier. And all the seasoned moms laughed. It was
Yeah.
just like, it was a crowd pleaser. So she might not actually read it until after she has the baby and is in it for a few months, but it ended up being a great baby shower gift. So be open to the different audiences through the life of your book that your book may appeal to. And that's kind of exciting too, isn't it?
Yeah, what that makes me think of is that idea of the value of picturing your book being consumed in an environment or being received in an environment or something like that. And even like I can think of all sorts of obvious ways this might play out for nonfiction. Like you're writing a book on calligraphy. And so you picture somebody like with your book there and their little calligraphy set, and they're like looking at your book and then doing the calligraphy. And you might say, oh, what's going to be perfect is if I can get this bound in a way that the book will lay out flat and, it can be there as a reference. But I can even imagine this for fiction. If your book is like a beach read, then make it a size that's easy to stick into a beach bag. If it's more like I'm going to sit down this evening and I'm going to page through this book of photography or something like that, like imagining not only the person who's consuming it, but the environment they're consuming it in, I think is very powerful.
Absolutely. Yep. And just keep writing all this stuff down
Yeah.
as you think about it and you visualize your audience and go back. You can go back to it later. It's okay. But all of these little nuggets are going to help in developing eventually a book marketing plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've spoken to guests before about the idea of audience, but I don't think I've ever had a chance to talk about the environment in which the book is being consumed. So that's very cool.
Yeah. And I think if you can spend the time to do that and you start to really understand where you've decided, okay, yeah, here's my audience. And now where does that audience hang out? And where does that audience learn about books? And for a parenting book, for a nonfiction parenting book, well, sheesh, that was easy because as a pregnant mom, I'm sitting in a doctor's office and it's parenthood, parenting, parents, mom and baby, all these magazines that were just absorbing anything having to do with helping a new mom. So I had all of those written down. Okay, well, these are the folks that I want to pitch. Well, guess what? When you have an idea of where your specific audience is going to be finding out about books, gosh, now you're focused your marketing time, aren't you? You're focusing your marketing time. You're focusing your marketing budget. Well, I'm not going to spend time pitching to Men's Health when
Yeah.
I know that I need to be spending time on X, Y, and Z. And all of a sudden, the whole world of book marketing becomes a lot smaller for you because you can focus. And then you try those things. And then if that doesn't work, you try the next thing that you thought of. But it's empowering. It gives you, it feels like you have a little more control over the situation. And then when folks are buzzing in your ear about, TikTok or book talk or whatever, you can say, shush, 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 shush. I'm focusing on where I know my main audience is, and I'm doing right by my book.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be inspirational in the same way that I know a lot of people, I've done this myself, is creating a placeholder book cover in Canva or something like that very early on. And
Yep.
so it's both just fun to think, oh, my book is going to be behind this cover someday, or, a cover like this. But also that idea of I'm picturing the ad in Parent Magazine or,
Mhm.
whatever you're seeing, it's both practical and inspirational, as you're saying.
Absolutely. Yep. So the next piece is message. So now you've got audience maybe covered, and message is also very powerful. And message again for nonfiction book or for a fiction book, you start to think about the themes. that run through your book? Fiction or nonfiction? What are the themes? So, my author and I created a way for you to harness all of your messages, and we call it the brain dump exercise. So, basically, it's just a blank piece of paper, and you just take a blank piece of paper and you just write down all the possible themes and messages that are in your book, whether fiction or nonfiction. And when you have all the themes, what's powerful about those messages are that you can use them to figure out what the description of your book's going to be on your Amazon book page. How you're going to use those as maybe keywords when you start to, if you in fact put your book on Amazon. What kinds of themes and messages are you going to put if you decide to do a press release about your book? Where you're going to describe your book when you put it forward, maybe for an award, how you're going to describe your book when maybe you put it forward for a book review, an industry book review. It's very, very powerful information. And it also will lead into and help with your audience. So if you have the overall themes and messages, then you can figure out where those messages are being covered. And are those messages being covered in places online where you can introduce your book to it as well? So you can also figure out where some of those themes and messages are covered in media going back to the pregnancy book example. Again, we mentioned that there are so many magazines that cover motherhood. You can take a look at those magazines and say, okay, well, are they covering some of the themes that I cover in my book? Well, guess what? I'm going to pitch an article to that magazine on that subject, and they're going to mention me and they're going to mention my book. And maybe that's a way to promote your book. Or I'm going to look on podcasts and I'm going to search by topic, by some of the themes in my book. And I'm going to say, okay, who's talking about these themes? Maybe they'd like to have me as a guest on their podcast talking about that theme. All different kinds of ways that you can pitch. Is it a newspaper, maybe a radio show, all of those types of things. Story ideas, when you're pitching media, sometimes you want to make their life easy, make their life as easy as possible. Come up with a story based on a theme that they love for them and say, hey, here are some story ideas. Have me on as a guest. Let's talk about it. And then, of course, they'll mention your book. So, but it's also another way, I think, of really getting to know your book. And once you really get to know your book, you can speak to what your book's about clearly, concisely, and then you become your own marketing person. One of the ways that we do that is through what I call an elevator pitch, maybe, a 5, 6, 7 word sentence describing your book for someone who you could meet in an elevator. So it's basically just a way for you to explain to somebody. And we have an example in the book as well, how to develop your elevator pitch. So if you're in an elevator with someone and, writers don't like marketing, they don't like to sell. But I like to say, you're not really selling. You're providing someone with something they already want. They want a book that's suspense thriller. They want a book that's true crime or detective or whatever it is. So you're just letting them know that your book is available in that genre. So say you're in an elevator with someone and they say, hey, what do you do? And, well, I'm a writer. Oh, writer. That's awesome. What do you write? Well, I'm working on a book. Oh, what's it about? Well, you want to have something quick. And I've run into this, Matty. I've been to book conferences and I've been, there to help authors. And I'll say, what's your book about? And they'll be like, well, it's kind of like this. And it kind of brings in that. And sometimes I talk about that, but I'm not really sure if it's about this. And it's like, I'm gone.
Yeah.
You need quick. You need something that's pithy and quick. For the pregnancy book, it was a fun guide for the new mom. Simple, pithy for the Get Your Seen and Sold book. It's a help for new authors and publishers to get started in book marketing, like something quick and pithy. Thriller, suspense, however you want to come up with it. But all of that can be determined from really looking into message and all the themes that your book shares. And again, start writing things down. This might be and I think what happens when you start to do that, And you'll know if you think about the last book that you read, how many themes were in the book? And there's usually 4 or 5. And then there's an overarching theme, maybe something that kind of beats out all the others. Start with that theme when you're describing your book and getting it out there, and maybe, eventually when you do some pitching. And that's going to be where you get the most hits for your marketing.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, one of the things, I thought all sorts of things there. One is the idea of thinking through, among all the other things we're talking about, what is your cover going to look like? What a reviewer is going to say. I think that's a fun way of understanding the direction that you're going. And the other thing I really liked is the idea of using articles or shorter forms of your longer work in order to test the waters. And so back in episode 296, I talked with Carrie Flanagan about article writing for platform and profit. But another great approach to this would be, just as you're saying, to write articles on the topic that you think you're going to have a longer book length work on, pitching it to platforms, or even just showing it to the people that you think your audience is going to be and seeing what the reaction is. Do these articles get placed? Do you write on a couple of different topics and some of the articles get placed and some of them don't? You could do the same thing with fiction, with short stories. Write a couple of short stories. Is there a character that, like, platforms say, oh yeah, I want to publish that short story, but not so much this other one? And what does that tell you about where you might want to take a longer work? So any of those ways you can test the direction you're going, I think, is a great help.
That's a great idea. I love that. And it's all part of the process. And I'm wondering, what do you find with authors to get over the hump of really not wanting to do this work, this research? Is there any way to encourage them?
I think that what you're saying is exactly right. The idea of saying that this is not a plea to purchase a product. It's a notification of something that you have to offer, not a plea for them to purchase it. I think that's exactly the way to go about it. What do you encounter, like, as you're giving people these marketing tips? What are you hearing, and how do you address those concerns that you might hear from authors?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because you talked about writing an article and hopefully promoting your book. And because of the work that I do, I said, I'm going to specify 3 reasons why authors resist book marketing. I thought, oh, this will make a good article. I'll come up with the 3 reasons, and then I'll come up with the answers to those reasons. And I pitched it to Writer's Digest, and they accepted it. So I wrote, an article for Writer's Digest right after the book came out. So they were able to say, Claudine Wolk, author of Get Your Book Seen and Sold. So, but anyway, in the article, it was, what are the top 3 reasons? Could you guess one of the reasons why authors resist book marketing?
Well, because it seems very self-promotional, and I think people feel uncomfortable with self-promotion.
Yes, that's one. Yep, they don't like to sell. So we like to say, just like you said, you're not selling yourself, you're actually providing something that's very important to people. Another reason is because it's a whole new genre for them, book marketing. It sounds more businessy, and they're creative.
Yeah, it's a whole skill set separate from creating the book.
That's it. And so what I like to say is, hey, once you learn it, you've got it. You'll understand it. You're going to try a whole bunch of different things, but you'll understand kind of how it works. So do it once. You're going to have to do it. It's part of being an author, kind of own it. And then the third reason is that they start to realize that, oh my gosh, if I'm going to start promoting this book, that means people are actually going to read it. And they're just psychologically stymied from, going forward because, oh my gosh, this means I'm actually going to get read. Somebody's going to read my work, and they take it so, personally, and it's going to be out there. And that's scary. I mean, you got to yeah, absolutely. It is totally scary. When my first book came out, I think I had like a breakdown right before it published. My husband hadn't read it, and he was kind of in the book. And I thought, oh God, the guy's going to leave me because I was honest. It was an honest book, And when, guys, I'm sure some guys are great in the delivery room, and my husband was great, but he didn't really understand what was going on. I mean, how could he? But I remember him back in the day, it was, when you had a back pain, your spouse was supposed to take a tennis ball and gently rub it against the back of your back to help. And he did it for about 5 seconds and said his wrist hurt. And I just thought that hilarious, being in labor and all that. But I thought, oh my gosh, I've revealed this to the world. Everyone's going to read this. So I finally broke down and I said, "Oh gosh, Joe, I'm so worried, you know." And he's like, "Well, does it make me look like a man's man?" I'm like, "Yeah, like every other man." He's like, "Okay, I don't care." And
That's
he
so
was
funny.
and he was good with it, right? I mean, think about all the people who write, biographies or they write memoirs and they're revealing all these family secrets, and then the fifth cousin reads it and is like, "Wow, I didn't know that about grandma." It is scary. Not to
Yeah.
mention you're putting yourself out there for possible rejection.
The
Uh,
other, just as an aside, the question
mhm.
I always want to ask any interviewee who writes more like spicy books is, do you let your mom and dad read it? That
Uh,
would be what would stop me. My parents aren't around anymore, but if they were, I would never write that because I would be like, "Oh, I don't want my parents." There's probably like a whole therapy conversation behind that thing. But what I like about that idea of engaging in these externally facing activities, these marketing activities early, is it really brings home the fact that yes, people are going to read your book. And that does sound kind of silly, but I think in the same way, I'm going to do one of my little soapbox things. I think that there are people who love to write, and there are people who love the idea of being a writer, and those
mm,
things are not always the same thing. And so I've been in like writers group meetings, and some conversation starts about, can I call myself a writer? And I say, are you writing? Yes. Then you're a writer. Or if the answer is no, it's like, you're not a writer, but you could become one by writing. But I think that this idea of imagining your work in the hands of a particular author, in the environment, what reviews are you going to get? What is the cover going to look like? All these kinds of things we've been talking about is really good because it really brings home the fact that somebody is going to pick your book off a virtual or real shelf, and they are going to open it. They're going to read your words. And I think, especially for indie authors, it's a great gut check to say, if you're really uncomfortable about that idea, is it just because you're an artist and you're a little concerned about how your audience is going to receive it? Or are you concerned because you think it's not how you want to represent yourself? And it can help you make those editorial decisions that you have to make as an indie author about, is your book really ready?
yes, yes. Oh, I think that's terrific. It really is. I think of Home Alone. Remember when Kevin says, "Oh my gosh, I'm home alone," and then he turns around and he goes, "I'm home alone." And it's kind of the same with a book. It's like,
Yeah.
people are gonna read my book. People are gonna read my book. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a great thing. So
Yeah.
embrace it and own it, and you've provided something fabulous to the world that only you can create, you know? It's a joyful thing, and I think, I was recently at a speaking gig, and I was talking about message, audience, and hook, and I really thought that it was for new authors. It was for writers who were looking to get published. And I thought, oh gosh, no one's going to come to this conference, this, seminar. I really didn't think I was going to get anybody because there's this feeling out there that authors don't want to know about marketing. They're just not ready and they just don't want to know and they want to, they just want to write. It was standing room only. So they really do. I think writers are understanding that in order to give this book that they love so much the best chance to be seen and sold and out there, they need to do some things. And I think it's a great thing that they're learning and that they really want to put their best foot forward on it, because at the end of the day, that's what you want for all of your books. You want them to have the best chance. And they're like your little babies, and you want to make sure that you've done everything you could possibly do. That said, you can't do everything. You just can't. And that's why going through these exercises are going to help you to make your marketing plan, which, let's face it, a marketing plan is simply a list of tasks that you do to get your book into your audience's hands. That's all it is. So don't be, threatened by it. You decide what's going to be on that marketing plan, and that's empowering too. Focus on the things that are most likely going to get your book in the hands of the target audience that you've identified. And that's all it is. And a lot can be set aside because it's not going to reach your target audience. It's just taking the time to really come up with those specific things.
Yeah, I think that as the author of Get Your Book Seen and Sold, the happy news for you is that in all the forums where I interact with authors, like on this podcast, on the Ally podcast, the topic they all want to hear about is book marketing. And
That's
so
right.
you've got a good audience there. And I also think that idea, everything you're saying about starting early, think through all these different perspectives on who's going to be consuming your book and in what circumstances and so on. And maybe not calling it a marketing plan. Like, I think just on the surface that creeps people out.
Yeah.
But thinking of it, and I wish I could maybe we'll come up with a phrase to use before the end of the interview, but it's like the birth announcement. I don't know. It's something else. It's something that will make it clearer to you that it is this, you have something to offer and you're letting the people who are going to value it know about it rather than a buy my book plan.
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost like like a birth plan, but
Yeah.
book. A
It's
birth
birth plan and then and on through the
Yes.
entire
Yes.
toddlerhood, childhood, teenage years. Yeah.
Right, 'cause the exciting thing is that you never have to be done, and I was thinking about an author, Dr. Jan Yeager, who wrote a book on book marketing, by the way, and she had written a book about friends. When Friendship Hurts, it's called. And the original cover went out with a Band-Aid, which that was part of the cover, which I thought was brilliant. When friendship hurts. I love that. And the book had been written years ago, and something happened in the news that brought up toxic friendships. And she jumped on it and she went back to her publisher. They created a new cover for it and they re-released it. And then she went back and she got through went through her promotional materials and she went at it again. And the book had a whole new life. So it's never too late. And that's not just for nonfiction books, that's for fiction books too. It's never too late. Most of the books I read are books that have been in print for a long time, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not what do they say? It's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yeah.
And take your time and try not to be scared. And the more you do, and the more you understand where you want to focus your energy, the less nervous that you will be about it.
Well, I think that is maybe the last point of resistance we want to hit, which is just the time it takes. And I think that idea of your marketing plan or your birth plan or whatever you decide you want to call it should not be an exhaustive list of every single thing it's possible to do. It's the list of things that you, as someone who's been a student of your audience and your message and your hook, understand are going to give you the biggest bang for the buck.
Absolutely. And a lot of it is genre driven. I often think about trying to get this information out through my Substack to authors so that they understand it and they only have a limited amount of time to go through, however many posts that they get. But to focus on just one thing at a time, I think makes the difference. And to focus energies on where you think you're going to get the most bang for your buck makes so much sense. And it's empowering. Yes, for example, you need a website as an author, but it doesn't have to have every bell and whistle. It just has to be your name and it has to include information about you, your book, where people can contact you, where media can contact you. It can be very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. So don't spend tens of thousands of dollars on a crazy website, right? But nobody knows you yet, so they're not going to know where to, you know what I mean? They're not going to look at your website anyway. So yeah, and just try not to get worked up about all the possible things that are out there because each genre is a little different. There's one out there, just to give folks an idea, it's called werewolf romantasy. Werewolf romantasy is a genre. Okay. This is a crazy genre. So who's reading that book? How are you going to find that audience? Who's reading that book? Well, what I would do is I would find one of these werewolf romantasy books and I would look on their Amazon page and I would see how they sell. How are they selling? What's this person's rank? And then I would look at their website and I would say, okay, where is this person promoting? Has this person been in any magazines? Has it been reviewed? Who reviewed it? Was it a website that reviewed it? Was it a werewolf romantasy magazine or online place? One gal that I interviewed, for example, she wrote, it was a fantasy book, and she found a ComCon. So she was not going to go to any old book trade show. She went to the ComCon book trade show.
Yep.
And she put her money into a booth where she would be promoting her book because that is where her audience was.
Yeah.
So she didn't have to worry about Book Talk, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, all that stuff. She focused on where's my audience going to be? This is where they go. They love ComCon. They're all over the place. So she signed up for every ComCon she could possibly go to, and she brought her trade show with her. And that's how she sold her books. Because guess what? It doesn't matter if you're the best-selling author on Amazon if that's not where your audience is buying your type of book.
Yeah.
So it's like a mindset, So start researching, folks.
Be a consumer of what you want to offer. So you know about those conferences and trade shows and so on. As a reader as well as a writer. I do like the fact that you started right out saying it's a little non-overwhelming book, the Get Your Book Seen and Sold book. And so please let everyone know where they can go to find out more about that book and you and everything you do online.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, you can find Get Your Book Seen and Sold. It's sold in every format. It's a paperback, which I think is the best because you can actually write in it. And it's also ebook and it's an audiobook as well, which is kind of fun. So if you just want to listen to how to do it. And you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Barnes & Noble. Anywhere you buy books, really, you can find it online. And you can find me at my Substack, claudinewolk.substack.com. And I have all kinds of goodies for paid subscribers, but most of my posts are free. And I just love to help authors to promote their books.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.